able to Almighty God, humbly acknowledging our need for your guidance in all things, and laying aside all private and personal interests, we ask that you grant that we may conduct the affairs of this House and of our country to the glory of your holy name, the maintenance of true religion and justice, the honour of the Queen, and the public welfare, peace and tranquillity of New Zealand. Through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. No petitions have been delivered to the clerk for presentation. No papers have been presented. Select committee reports have been delivered for presentation.
Reports of the Finance and Expenditure Committee on the report of the Controller and Auditor General, Medium-Term Planning and Government Departments, 4-year plans. Reserve Bank of New Zealand Monetary Policy Statement, May 2017. Special report of the Officers of Parliament Committee on the briefing on the Controller and Auditor General.
The reports on the briefing, the Reserve Bank of New Zealand's Monetary Policy Statement and the Controller and Auditor General's report are set down for consideration. The Clerk has been informed of the introduction of a bill.
Appropriation 2016-17 Supplementary Estimates Bill. Introduction.
That bill is set down for first reading.
Mr Speaker,
The Honourable Stephen Joyce.
I hereby present the Supplementary Estimates of Appropriations for the Government of New Zealand for the year ending 30 June 2017.
That paper is published under the authority of the House. The House now comes to the delivery of the budget.
Mr Speaker, I hereby present the 2017 Budget Speech, the Budget at a Glance, Capital at a Glance, the Fiscal Strategy Report, the Budget Economic and Fiscal Update, the Summary of Budget Initiatives, and the Estimates of Appropriation for the Government of New Zealand for the year ending 30 June 2018.
Those papers are published under the authority of the House.
Should we do that then?
Nice tie.
Thank you.
Appropriation 2017-18 Estimates Bill. Introduction.
The Appropriation 2017-18 Estimates Bill is set down for first reading forthwith.
Mr Speaker, I move that the Appropriation 2017 Estimates Bill be now read a first time.
The question is that the motion be agreed to. Those of that opinion will say aye.
Aye.
To the contrary, no. The ayes have it.
Appropriation 2017-18 Estimates Bill. First reading.
The Appropriations 2017-18 Estimates Bill is set down for second reading forthwith.
Mr Speaker,
The Honourable Stephen Joyce.
I move that the Appropriation 2017-18 Estimates Bill be now read a second time. Mr Speaker, it is an honour and a privilege to present my first budget to the public of New Zealand, the 9th of this national-led government. In doing so, I acknowledge my predecessor and our new Prime Minister, Bill English, for his hard work and leadership in facing down the decade of deficits, bringing New Zealand successfully through the global financial crisis and responding to the impacts of the Canterbury earthquakes. Bill English is widely seen internationally as one of the world's best finance ministers of the last decade. Which has to be said, Mr Speaker, doesn't make my job any easier. Mr Speaker, the 2017 budget is about delivering for New Zealanders. It is New Zealanders who have worked hard over the last 8 years, who have made sacrifices and who have turned this country around in the most trying of circumstances. It is New Zealanders who are striving to build a more confident and more robust country. This budget is about delivering more of the public services, the infrastructure, the resilience and the incomes that New Zealanders need to get ahead and provide for their families. This budget is about the opportunity we have to build on the platform we have all created and deliver greater prosperity for New Zealanders. Budget 2017 is possible because of the constructive working relationships the National Party has with United Future, the Māori Party and ACT. I want to acknowledge their continuing support and contribution to strong and stable government. Mr Speaker, the New Zealand economy is performing well. We have experienced positive growth in all but one quarter of the last 6 years. We are at the moment growing faster than the United States, the UK, Australia, the EU, Japan and Canada. Our economy is 14% larger than it was just 5 years ago. This growth is being achieved by Kiwi entrepreneurs, Kiwi businesses and Kiwi workers, all taking on the world and succeeding. Under this government's strong economic leadership, New Zealand is shaping globalisation to its advantage. We've embraced increased trade, new technologies, innovation and investment. We are becoming more confident, both overseas and here at home. When we hit tough times in dairy, our biggest export industry, we got on and diversified. We've grown our tourism industry, education and business services. We're selling more apples, wine, kiwi fruit and other high-value foods. And we're growing an increasingly impressive tech sector with hundreds and hundreds of competitive Kiwi companies selling their amazing technologies all over the globe. This is our future, Mr Speaker, an innovative, outward-facing high-tech country selling high-value products and services to the world. A strong and growing economy is important, Mr Speaker, because of the job opportunities it provides for New Zealanders. Well over 200,000 more jobs have been created over the last 3 years, Mr Speaker. Our adult employment rate is now its highest ever, with 67.1% of everybody over the age of 15 employed. That's the third highest rate in the OECD. The strength of our economy in recent years has started correcting some of the imbalances that have worried us all for a very long time, notably our external accounts. We have an unusually low balance of payments deficit for this stage of the economic cycle, and the amount we owe as a country to the world has dropped from 82% of GDP in 2008 to 60% today. That's very good progress. We have, however, much more to do. We need to maintain and extend this growth if we are to decisively deal with the long-term imbalances of the past and provide for the sustained prosperity that New Zealanders deserve. The medium-term economic outlook is positive, led by rising export values, high levels of house building and commercial construction, and low interest rates. Treasury forecasts annual economic growth to average over 3% for the next 5 years, peaking at around 3.8% in 2019. The outlook is driven by the government's strong economic plan and confident New Zealand companies who are investing, innovating, exporting and creating skilled jobs. Employment is forecast to keep growing strongly and unemployment is expected to steadily decline. Nominal GDP is now forecast to be a cumulative $23.9 billion higher over the next 5 years than was expected just at the half-year update, Mr. Speaker. Treasury's economic projections flow through to increased tax revenue. These are expected to grow slightly more than forecast in last year's budget, even after the changes that I'm announcing today. Included in the tax forecast is $250 million over the forecast period in additional revenue from the government's work to halt multinational tax avoidance. The government has taken the decision to increase the operating allowance in this budget to $1.8 billion a year, $300 million more than was previously allocated. This will allow us to invest more in the public services necessary for a growing country. As previously signalled, the pay equity settlement for care and support workers is being treated as separate to the allowances. We have also increased future operating allowances. Next year's allowance will be $1.7 billion and subsequent years will be adjusted upwards by 2% each year. The Overgall surplus for the 2017-18 year is predicted to be $2.9 billion, rising to $7.2 billion by 2020-2021. These surpluses are significant, but they will be needed to meet the cost of the very large new capital investment the government is committed to over the next 4 budgets. The government's capital spend over the next 4 years uses virtually all the cash generated from the operating surpluses. When added together, core Crown residual cash over the forecast period is almost exactly nil. As a result of our responsible fiscal management, net debt peaked at 25.5% of GDP and is projected to fall to 19.3% of GDP by 2020-2021. New Zealand superannuation fund contributions are expected to resume as scheduled in that year. Mr. Speaker, the first priority in any budget must be to take the right steps to keep the economy growing. To improve public services, invest in infrastructure or boost family incomes, we must continue to have a strong and successful economy. A strong economy can never be taken for granted. It must be nurtured and worked on, or it will quickly go backwards. While the world economy is growing, there are plenty of risks and plenty of political uncertainties that could affect us here in New Zealand. One of the biggest current risks is the more inward-looking, isolationist economic policies being pushed in some parts of the world and even by some politicians here at home. These people want to be more protectionist on trade, slash immigration, reduce foreign investment, centralise wage bargaining and increase taxes. All of these things, Mr. Speaker, would slow our industries down, reduce competitiveness and cost jobs. That's the opposite of a recipe for growth. That's a recipe for stalling growth. Mr. Speaker, the government's plan is sensible, conservative fiscal policy, strong orthodox monetary policy and an ongoing program of microeconomic reform that enhances the competitiveness and confidence of Kiwi businesses. It is crucial that we pull on all 3 of these levers. Our program of microeconomic reform is called the Business Growth Agenda. It includes measures to boost New Zealand's trade, lift the skills of our workforce recruit skilled migrants our companies need to grow, boost innovation, attract new investment, especially in regional New Zealand, and build the infrastructure that a growing economy needs. Budget 2017 invests $1 billion in new operating expenditure over 4 years in sustaining the strong economic plan that is getting New Zealand to grow. First, the government is allocating $373 million in the second round of our Innovative New Zealand program. Innovative New Zealand is a series of science, R&D and skills initiatives that are working together to lift the innovation activity of New Zealand companies. The funding includes $82 million for the government's preeminent applied science fund, the Endeavour Fund, $132 million for tertiary education to ensure young New Zealanders obtain the skills we need, and $75 million for Callaghan Innovations R&D grants to help our tech companies succeed. It's all about adding more value to our export volumes. Investment in innovation is hugely important for lifting our productivity and providing for our future prosperity. Budget 2017 allocates $134 million over 4 years to advance New Zealand's Trade Agenda 2030, including opening new embassies in Dublin and Colombo, as we work towards our ambitious target of having 90% of goods covered by trade agreements. There is $304 million towards the ongoing development of our screen sector and $146 million in new funding to grow our tourism infrastructure around the country so every region can benefit from the growth in our tourism industry. We can't talk about lifting economic growth in New Zealand without talking about the increasingly important Māori economy, which is crucial for lifting not just the economic and social fortunes of Māori, but of all New Zealanders. The government's comprehensive program for Māori economic development is called He Kaike Akaringa and is led by Māori Development Minister Te Urao Flavel. Budget 2017 contains $93 million in new Māori development initiatives, including $10 million to support the development of Māori tourism and $17 million for Māori housing initiatives. The funding will allow for an extra 2,500 families to access whānau ora and additional support for the continued revitalisation of te reo and Māori culture. Mr Speaker, the government's biggest single fiscal priority in Budget 2017 is to invest in the public services necessary for a growing country. We are therefore allocating $7 billion over 4 years to sustain and expand public services in health, education, law and order and social development. This investment reflects our commitment to meet the requirements of a growing population while investing prudently in the core services that Kiwis rely upon. The new funding in Budget 2017 includes $3.9 billion over 4 years for New Zealand's health sector, taking health spending to a record $16.7 billion next year. DHBs will benefit most, with an extra $1.76 billion added over 4 years to invest in services, improve access and help meet cost pressures and population growth. Over $200 million will be invested in disability support services and $38 million more in primary care. $59 million will be invested in our ambulance services across health and ACC so that all emergency road ambulance call-outs are double crewed by 2021. $60 million will be provided to Pharmac for access to new medicines for Kiwis that need them. Mr Speaker, the health budget includes $1.54 billion for the pay equity settlement of 55,000 care and support workers. From 1 July this year, this dedicated and predominantly female workforce will receive a significant pay increase. For the 20,000 workers currently on the minimum wage, this increase will be at least 21%, which means full-time workers will be taking home at least an extra $100 a week. Mr. Speaker, we are committing $1.1 billion over 4 years in additional operating expenditure for schools and early childhood centres. The funding includes $767 million for role growth, a $61 million increase in operational grant funding for schools, and $35 million in targeted additional funding for early childhood centres. $63 million will be provided to support students with additional learning needs, including more teacher aid hours and a new program for parents and teachers of young children with autism. We are also investing significantly in school infrastructure, and I want to come back to this later because infrastructure is a major focus of this budget. We are investing $1.2 billion in new operating expenditure over 4 years for law and order. This includes funding for 10% more police staff to reduce crime and reoffending and ensure 95% of the population will live within 25 kilometres of a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week police presence. We're also upping our investment in justice, courts and corrections services and introducing new initiatives in burglary prevention, reducing youth reoffending, and supporting at-risk prisoners. This government is focused on helping our most vulnerable people lead successful lives. Budget 2017 includes $64 million to help people move off benefits and into work by tailoring interventions to individuals' needs. $37 million will be provided to help improve the safety of family violence victims and stop family violence escalating. We will be providing $185 million to further expand social housing services. And we are making a $424 million investment in the new Ministry for Vulnerable Children, Oranga Tamariki, including funding for caregiver support, children's teams, Family Start and youth justice. Budget 2017 includes $321 million for 14 cross-agency social investment initiatives that are designed to tackle long-term issues for vulnerable New Zealanders. These cover areas like helping kids get a better start in life, addressing barriers to employment and independence, and reducing criminal reoffending. A big focus in our social investment program is mental health. So we've ring-fenced $100 million in a special social investment fund to support innovative solutions to address mental health issues. Overall, the government has budgeted an additional $224 million over 4 years for mental health services. Social investment is about tackling our most challenging social issues. The combination of these new initiatives and the government's decisions about family incomes will allow us to make serious headway with some of the longer-term challenges faced by the most vulnerable New Zealanders. Mr. Speaker, it is crucially important that those delivering core public services maintain a constant focus on lifting the productivity of their sectors. These are big funding increases, which reflect the needs of a growing country. However, it is my expectation that we also achieve a greater return for each additional dollar of taxpayers' money. As well as placing a number of requirements on results for the increased expenditure, I'm today announcing that the government is asking the Productivity Commission to conduct an investigation into measuring and improving the productivity of core public services to ensure all New Zealanders see better results from the investment of their tax monies in these services. The government's second fiscal priority in this budget is investing in the infrastructure of the growing economy. This government has a strong track record as New Zealand's infrastructure government. Over the last several years, we have grown infrastructure spending considerably and commenced some major transformative investments in New Zealand's public infrastructure on behalf of taxpayers. We are completely modernising our telecommunications system with the ultra-fast broadband and rural broadband programs. We have embarked upon the most ambitious development of new motorways and expressways seen in several decades, and have invested more than $4 billion in our railway system, including funding new commuter rail fleets in both Auckland and Wellington. And we are in the process of building more new hospitals and schools than New Zealand has seen in generations. However, Budget 2017 takes New Zealand's infrastructure investment to another level. For the first time, the government is allocating $4 billion in new capital funding in one budget across the education, health, defence, justice, housing, primary sector and transport portfolios. The new investment includes a further $392 million for more new schools and classrooms around New Zealand, taking our total investment of new money in the last 4 budgets to $1.4 billion. The new money this year will provide for 6 new schools, 2 main school expansions, the relocation of 2 special education schools, 11 new special education satellite units, and around 305 more new classrooms nationwide. Budget 2017 includes $150 million in additional capital for the health sector, $576 million for Defence Force upgrades, $763 million for new prison capacity, $63 million for Crown Irrigation to invest in new water storage, and $100 million for the Crown Land Program, which frees up more government land for housing. $1.8 billion of the new budget spend is in the transport portfolio. This includes $450 million for Kiwi Rail for the rail network around New Zealand, $436 million for the first stage in Auckland's City Rail Link, $812 million for the reinstatement of State Highway 1 north and south of Kaikoura, and $98 million for upgrades to Wellington's metro rail network. I'm also confirming today the government's intention to allocate a further $7 billion in new capital spend in the next 3 budgets, taking our total additional capital spend to $11 billion. Mr. Speaker, through this new capital spend and the existing commitments the government and its key infrastructure agencies have made, we will invest a total of $32.5 billion over the next 4 years in new infrastructure. Mr. Speaker, that is a 40% increase on the last 4 years. The New Zealand Transport Agency alone will invest $9.2 billion in new state highways over the 4 years and will open over 540 lane kilometres of new highways. And Housing New Zealand will invest $2.2 billion in the Auckland housing program as announced by Minister Adams last week, which will contribute to the 34,000 new houses that we will build in Auckland over the next 10 years, alongside the huge growth in private sector housing construction, which is already underway. This is an unprecedented level of infrastructure investment for any New Zealand government, even including the period of funding the Christchurch rebuild. We intend to extend it further with a greater use of partnerships between central and local government and between government and the private sector. I'll have more to say on that subject in the coming weeks. Mr. Speaker, one of the most important duties of government is to be able to stand behind vulnerable communities and vulnerable people when the chips are down. People generally prefer to look after themselves, and for the most part they can. But when disaster strikes or a big economic shock happens, families and communities need their government to be ready to help them through. This government's definition of resilience is the ability to provide that support. Through the global financial crisis, we stood behind New Zealanders. And following the Canterbury and now the Kaikoura earthquakes, we have pledged to rebuild shattered communities. It is that experience that has taught us the importance of having the financial capacity to respond. The GFC and the Canterbury earthquakes involved the government running up debts amounting to around 20% of GDP. It was the right thing to do. And the right thing to do now is to run a strong economy and reduce that debt, so we have the room to do the same again, if and when we need to. That is why I announced a new medium-term target of reducing net debt to between 10 and 15% of GDP by 2025, following on from the current target of around 20% of GDP by 2020. Mr. Speaker, we owe it to our future to take that decision. Once we reach that target, the intention is to stabilise debt at that level and use any extra fiscal room for further investment in public services and infrastructure or further tax changes. Another important part of the New Zealand resilience story is the role of the Earthquake Commission and the National Disaster Fund. With the help of international reinsurance, the fund has so far paid out over $9.5 billion in claims to those affected by the Canterbury earthquakes. It is currently expected to pay out another $550 million in claims for the Kaikoura earthquakes. Those claims will completely exhaust the National Disaster Fund. We need to restart the process of replenishing it. I am therefore announcing that from 1 November this year, the EQC premium rate will increase from 15 cents per $100 in cover to 20 cents per $100 in cover. This will have the effect of increasing homeowners' annual EQC premiums by up to $69 per year. The change will mean that we are well on the road to restoring the National Disaster Fund to around $1.75 billion within 10 years. Mr. Speaker, it is important that New Zealand families directly share the benefits of strong economic growth. This is the whole point of having a strong and growing economy and a healthy set of government accounts. The first and most enduring way we can do that is to ensure that there are job opportunities for all those who want to work. That is now increasingly the case. There are more than 2.5 million people employed in this country for the first time, and indexes of job vacancies are at near record highs. Fewer people are reliant on the benefit system. The percentage of people whose income is received through a main benefit has dropped to just 9.6% of the working age population, the lowest level it's been in the March quarter since 1997. The number of children growing up in a benefit-dependent family has dropped by more than 50,000 over the last 5 years. However, it is also important to ensure that the income tax system works well for New Zealanders and keeps pace with rising incomes. It is now 7 years since we last altered the income tax system. Over that time, the average wage has risen from $49,500 to $58,900. That's good news. But because of that change, many more middle-income earners are faced with a marginal tax rate of 30%, cutting in at just $48,000. We also have a number of lower-income people with young families that are struggling to get ahead. And we have a system that is becoming too complex. As a result of working for families and other changes, it can be very hard for people to work out what they're entitled to and how the work they do is linked to the income they receive. If the level of complexity is indicated by the number of businesses advertising to do people's tax returns, then complexity is at near record highs too. Today I'm announcing a $2 billion a year family incomes package commencing 1 April next year that will start addressing some of these issues. The package will make changes to tax thresholds, working for families and the accommodation supplement to help Kiwi families get ahead. It is a first step towards simplifying the income tax system. The family incomes package is carefully designed to assist low and middle income earners with young families and higher housing costs. This package, Mr. Speaker, will benefit 1.3 million working age families in New Zealand by on average $26 per week, Mr. Speaker. The package is in 4 parts. Firstly, it increases the $14,000 income tax threshold to $22,000 and the $48,000 tax threshold to $52,000. This change provides a tax reduction of $11 a week to anyone earning more than $22,000 per year, increasing to $20 a week for anyone earning more than $52,000 per year. A couple with both partners earning the average wage will be $41 a week better off from these threshold changes. Secondly, Mr. Speaker, it removes the independent earner tax credit of up to $10 a week. The independent earner tax credit was introduced to provide a tax reduction to lower-income people without families. It is only claimed by about one-third of eligible recipients during the tax year. People who lose this credit will be compensated in full by the lifting of the lowest income tax threshold from $14,000 to $22,000. Mr. Speaker, the third change is to family tax credits. Working for families currently varies the amount each family receives according to the age of their children, with families with children aged 16 to 18 years receiving a higher rate than those with children aged under 16. And yet, as many parents will tell you, bringing up younger children can be just as expensive as bringing up older children. I'm therefore announcing today that the government will lift family tax credit rates for young children to those of children aged 16 to 18, also from 1 April next year. This is a significant change, Mr. Speaker. The family tax credit rates for the first child aged under 16 will increase by $9 a week, while the rates for each subsequent child increase by either $18 or $27 per week, depending on the age of the child. At the same time, the government will complete its planned adjustments to working for families abatements, with the family tax credit set to abate at 25 cents in the dollar above an income of $35,000. This will ensure that the government's extra assistance is targeted to lower-income families. Approximately 310,000 families will benefit from these increases to the family tax credit. A couple with 2 children under 13 and one partner working and earning $55,000 a year will gain $41 per week, $20 from the income tax change and $21 from the Working for Families change. The final part of the family incomes package relates to the accommodation supplement, which assists New Zealanders with high housing costs. The accommodation supplement has not been updated since 2005 and is based on 2003 rents. Today, I'm announcing that from 1 April next year, the maximum accommodation supplement rates for a 2-person household will increase between $25 and $75 a week, while the maximum rates for larger households will increase between $40 and $80 a week. In addition, changes to the accommodation supplement areas will provide further gains for some families. These, Mr. Speaker, are in addition to the tax and Working for Families changes already announced in the package. This increase in the accommodation supplement is expected to directly benefit around 136,000 low-income households around New Zealand. It will also reduce the reliance on temporary additional support that some families currently receive to top up their accommodation supplement. I'm also announcing that the accommodation benefit, which is paid to eligible student allowance recipients who experience housing stress, will also increase by up to $20 per week. The family incomes package is a coordinated set of measures to lift family incomes and improve the rewards for hard work. Each element works together. While lower income families receive a smaller amount from the tax component, they receive relatively more from the accommodation supplement and the family tax credit changes. The reverse is true for higher income families. This package particularly focuses on assisting low-income families with young children and those experiencing high housing costs. 154,000 families with incomes in the lowest quintile will benefit by an average of more than $35 a week, or $1,840 per year. This package, Mr. Speaker, is expected to lift 20,000 households above the threshold of severe housing stress and reduce the number of children living in families receiving less than half of the median income by around 50,000. There will also be flow-on effects of this package. Around 750,000 superannuitants will benefit because of the link between New Zealand's superannuation and after-tax wages. The couple rate for superannuitants will increase by $13 a week on April 1 next year, in addition to the normal adjustments because of wage indexation. A small number of families may face losses from this package because of the complex interactions of our tax and transfer system. The government has established a transitional fund of $2 million over the next 4 years for anybody significantly impacted by the changes. The total cost of this package is $6.5 billion over 4 years, rising from $604 million in the 2017-18 financial year through to $2 billion in out years. Mr. Speaker, it is always important for politicians to remember that the money they spend each year comes directly from the pockets of hard-working Kiwis. We spend a lot of time thinking about how we can spend that money as politicians. The Families Incomes Package is the first step in allowing Kiwi families to spend more of their own money to make the decisions that are best for them. Mr. Speaker, this budget is all about delivering for New Zealanders. It takes 4 significant steps to bring the benefits of a stronger economy to all New Zealanders. It makes a big investment in public services. It makes a record investment in new infrastructure. It improves the resilience of our country to future shocks. And it strengthens families by lifting their incomes. It's important that we remember that the only reason we get to have this conversation is because we have a strong and growing economy built on a strong economic plan. We must maintain our focus on growing the economy and sticking to the plan. It is only by doing that, Mr. Speaker, that we can provide for the prosperity of all New Zealanders. Thank you.
The question is the motion be agreed to.
Mr. Speaker.
Andrew Little.
Mr. Speaker, I move that all the words after that be omitted and the following substituted. This House has no confidence in a government that has had 9 years to build a better New Zealand, and yet we have a housing crisis, we have mental health services on the verge of collapse, we have education that is becoming more and more expensive, and we have infrastructure that is unable to cope with the demands of a surging population, and it's time for fresh thinking and real solutions. Mr. Speaker, after 9 years and 4 months out from the next general election, this national government has suddenly discovered that wages for too many are too low, and they've done nothing about it until now, and even then they haven't done much about it. Too many can no longer afford to buy or even rent a home, and they've done nothing about it. Too many people are squeezed into our big cities, schools are overcrowded, public services are struggling, congestion is choking our cities, and they've done nothing about it. Mr. Speaker, here was their chance. A chance to show that they take New Zealanders' concerns seriously. And they've muffed it. Let me just take you through some of the points that come out of this budget. Let's look at the tax package, shall we? Let's look at the minimum wage worker. The worker on the minimum wage, working 40 hours a week, who was getting the independence earner tax credit and was getting the tax break that they gave them. They got $11 and they got $10 taken off them. $11 given to them, $10 taken off them. $1. $1. There it is. This is the dollar bill budget. That's what it is. It gets worse. Mr. Speaker, it gets worse. Even the government's own the figures that they proudly furnish us all with in the lockup, the little bit of paper that talks about 2 low-income workers, both on an income of $33,000 each. And they lose their independence earner tax credit, so they lose $20, and the tax benefit for them is less than $1 each. It's less than a dollar bill budget. This is the dollar bill budget. This is not taking low-income earners seriously at all. Let's have a look at health. Let's have a look at health. And let's have a look at mental health. The so-called ring-fenced $100 million. That was money that's already been promised and provided to the DHBs. Now they've been told money that they had to spend for general health services, now they've got to spend on mental health services without any expectation about what that's going to go on. This is not fixing up our mental health services. This is a fudge. This is a fudge. They do provide for $25 million a year, unspecified, on extra mental health services. They are so woeful in their planning, so woeful in their direction, they don't even know what it's going to go on. They put it in the budget. They are so out of touch with New Zealanders' concerns about mental health right now, they don't even know what needs to happen. And they won't fund it properly. I have to tell you, the biggest health risk this nation faces today is the amount of fudge being rammed down New Zealanders' throats they expected to take in this budget. And it's not good enough. They have funded DHBs for this or the next financial year and subsequently more than $200 million less than the DHBs need to keep pace with population growth and demographic changes. They are short-changing and starving our health services yet again, year after year. No wonder they're struggling. They might have double-crewed the ambulances, Mr. Speaker, but it's still the ambulance at the bottom of the cliff. Mr. Speaker, in housing, there is nothing of substance to address the most urgent, pressing issue facing the nation today, and that is the shortage of housing. $100 million, they say, for purchasing land for, you know how many houses? 1,200. 1,200. Remember the announcement a couple of weeks ago, 34,000 houses that were still woefully inadequate too? Well, they provided in this budget for 1,200 houses. That's going to fix Auckland's 40,000 house shortage, not to mention the rest of the country's 20 or 25,000 housing shortage. This is rinky-dink, short-changing dollar bill budget. I don't even get me started on the school operations grant. What an embarrassment. What a disgrace. 1.3% adjustment at a time when inflation in that sector is going through the roof. That is lower than inflation, and the people who will suffer will be the students, their families and the teachers who are struggling to provide a high-quality education in this country as it is. Mr. Speaker, New Zealanders deserve better. New Zealanders deserve better. We are blessed to be in one of the greatest countries in the world and to enjoy our unparalleled beauty and a sense of security and a freedom to chase our dreams. And we pride ourselves, like all New Zealanders, on our hard work, innovation, our creative thinking, our great artistic expression. That's what we're known around the world for, and our brute determination to get stuff done. But that's not the experience of many New Zealanders today. Too many are missing out. And after 9 years of this government, New Zealanders now are being shut out of things that have been our boast to the world. You see, there's something else that defines us as a nation, something that holds us together. It's the idea that our small, plucky nation faces the world to meet its challenges, and as we do that, we look out for each other. And we insist that no matter on the circumstances of our birth, whether in New Zealand or abroad, rich or poor, Māori or Pākehā, we will have the opportunity to fulfil our potential, to do our best, to be the greatest, and to do what we can, or to do great things, or to do humble things. But knowing all the time that we will be picked up when we fall and we'll give back when we have the chance. That's the Kiwi spirit. That's the very essence of being a New Zealander. That is the idea of New Zealand. 9 years on under this national government, we ask, why do we have such a chronic shortage of housing and many young couples who, no matter how hard they work, no matter how hard they save, they cannot get their first home? That's right. 9 years on under this national government, a growing number of New Zealanders ask, why do we have New Zealanders that are homeless in this country, living in overcrowded houses, living in cars and garages? 9 years on under this national government, New Zealanders ask why their rent is rising so fast and why their pay cannot keep up. 9 years on under this national government, New Zealanders ask why 60,000 of our fellow citizens could not get hospital treatment last year because their local hospital couldn't afford to treat them. We ask why our mental health services are stretched to breaking point and why, in this beautiful country of ours, we have one of the highest teen suicide rates in the developed world. Mr. Speaker, that's not right. And what's worse is a government 9 years on that does not take it seriously, does not have anything serious to say or do about it. That is shameful. 9 years on under this national government, New Zealanders ask why so many schools are overcrowded and why, with an ageing teacher workforce, so little is being done to grow the next generation of great teachers. 9 years on under this national government, New Zealanders ask why tens and tens of thousands of young New Zealanders are out of work and not doing any training or are in any education and are fast running out of hope. 9 years on under this national government, New Zealanders ask why the regions have been neglected, why they cannot generate the jobs to keep their local populations in work. Mr. Speaker, today's budget is a squandered opportunity. This was an opportunity to do the real social investment, to invest in those things that are the foundation of opportunity and fairness, the foundation of wealth and prosperity for this nation, the foundation of the Kiwi and of the New Zealand idea. No one will say those on low and middle incomes don't need extra cash at the end of the working week. Of course they do. They need it now, not next April. But let's not kid ourselves. Remember working for families. Remember when that was first introduced. Remember who voted against it. Remember what they called it. So they vehemently opposed it then. And it was introduced as a measure to deal with a dysfunctional labour market that was incapable of providing a living wage to many, many New Zealanders. And you know what? Nothing's changed. That remains the case today. Now, the government is trying to seek plaudits for funding the significant pay increase for home care and aged care workers, and I congratulate Christine Bartlett, ETU and the predecessor unions and all those who were involved in taking it to court and bringing this government to justice. That deal happened, and that line item is in this budget because this government was ordered by the courts to do so. Make no mistake, this is not generosity, and it's not part of some big strategic plan to lift incomes of the lowest paid New Zealanders. So let's get real. Mr. Speaker, New Zealand needs a fresh approach. New Zealand needs new ideas. We cannot claim success as a nation, nor can we claim we are prosperous when so many are missing out, and when we are setting up a bleak future for the generations that follow. Labor's plan is very clear. On housing, we understand, we get, every New Zealander, every family needs a roof over their head that they can call their own. We need, and Labor will build, affordable homes across Auckland and around New Zealand. We will set up We will set up the apparatus. We'll develop the workforce. We'll deal with the landowners. We'll deal with the property developers. We'll deal with the councils. We'll deal with iwi. We'll deal with Uncle Tom Cobley and all if we have to build affordable homes, 100,000 of them. And we will build state houses. And some of them will be for people who once upon a time voted for the Māori Party as well. People will have warm, safe, dry homes, and we won't have 40,000 New Zealanders homeless. That is shameful and that is a disgrace. And not a single reference in this budget to a single solution about that. On health, we will work to restore the $1.7 billion cuts from health over the last few years, and yes, that is real, and yes, it has happened, and yes, New Zealanders are suffering as a result. That's right. People will again have confidence. They can get good, safe treatment from their local hospital, and that will include getting pharmaceuticals that deal with modern conditions and are effective. And we will fix mental health services. We will have a primary mental health care pilot that will set us up and set generations up and fix our mental health problem. And we will have nurses in schools as well. And we will do the workforce development that goes with it, because what matters most is giving our young people a chance and hope again. That's right. On education, we will have a strategy, an education strategy that's about preparing our children for success and having education available throughout a person's working life, because let's face it, the world of work is changing and technology is changing. It's changing what we do and how we do it, and we need an education system that suits. We'll lift the funding freeze on schools, and we'll make sure that there is a plan for school buildings that we will actually follow through on. That's right. We'll work with teachers and parents and employers so that we have a school system that's fit for the 21st century and beyond. You see, education is so vital for that new world of technology and for new ways of working. We have to get education right. And right now it's floundering because it has a lack of leadership and a government that doesn't care. Labor will bring a fresh approach to education. Mr. Speaker, on the regions, we'll partner with the regions and we will secure new investments that will generate new jobs, good jobs, skilled jobs, better paid jobs, just as we have proposed to do in Dunedin with the Centre of Digital Excellence, just as we've proposed to do in Gisborne with a plant to build prefabricated housing, because it fits our housing strategy as well. Thinking ahead, thinking about the issues that matter to New Zealanders. That's what New Zealanders are looking for a plan. That's what we're going to do. Mr. Speaker, for our young, it is just plain wrong and just plain shameful that the number of young people not in work, education or training is growing year by year. We are selling a generation down the drain, and I won't have it anymore. This is a top priority for me and for Labor. We'll pay employers the equivalent of the dole whenever they take on a new apprentice. We'll set up long-term youth unemployed with a 6-month job doing important work in their communities. Accuse me of job creation, I'll wear that badge with pride. I want to look after our young. On infrastructure, we'll get our cities moving again, getting freight and people moving. And it won't just be about roads, it will be about rail, it will be about coastal shipping, it will be about all transport modes, so we can get the country moving again and get investment that actually makes a difference. And we'll partner with local government to make that difference. Mr. Speaker, we need a fresh approach. New Zealand needs a fresh approach. New Zealand needs a plan that works, a plan that is about working for those who cannot work at the moment. But one thing I can tell you, Mr. Speaker, is absolutely guaranteed, that we have signed up, our party has signed up, to budget responsibility rules. And that means not just planning for the next financial year, but for all the years that follow, being responsible about the present and the future. And that's what we will bring to it. We won't write out any cheque that we cannot be cashed. Mr. Speaker, this budget is an election year budget. It should come as no surprise when you make your finance minister your campaign manager too. That's what's in this budget. That's what was reflected in this budget. This is about a National Party 9 years on, out of energy, out of ideas, doesn't know what to do, desperate to convince people that they want to do something, realised what the real problems are because they haven't listened to New Zealand for too long. Mr Speaker, on the 23rd of September, New Zealanders will have a chance for a fresh approach, for new ideas. They'll be voting Labour.
The question is that the amendment be agreed to. The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Well, Mr Speaker, it was interesting to see the Leader of the Opposition reading off an iPad. I think he logged on to the wrong part of the Labor website. Because that was Mike Moore's speech from the 1993 budget. And I know that because I heard it. Mr Speaker, on a sunny day in New Zealand, when hundreds of young New Zealanders this week have taken up their first ever apprenticeship, when exporters are looking forward to opening new markets behind the trade agreements that have been negotiated, when innovators are finding the capital to start their online business, on a sunny day, here comes the Labour Party like a cold, wet wind and rain, because that's how they think New Zealand is. Well, it's not. It's a confident country going ahead with real momentum and more confidence about its place in the world than it's had for a long, long time. Mr Speaker, the Labour Party's more like a kind of tattered old red phone box, watching the traffic go by, wishing the world would stop and wind backwards so they'd become relevant. But I have to tell the Labour Party, the phone's off the hook. The phone's not going to ring. The traffic's only going to speed up and get faster. And the Labour Party, after 9 long years of opposition, are like their policies, worse than when they started. Mr Speaker, this is a budget that represents and presents to New Zealand, looking out ahead, one of the best opportunities in a couple of generations to build the benefits of sustained growth. And Mr Speaker, it could only be delivered by a national government. And I'll tell you why. Because we're confident about New Zealand. The opposition parties simply aren't. They don't believe in our families and communities and our businesses. We're confident about New Zealand, about the growing assurance of its place in the world. Mr Speaker, we're confident about our increasingly respected economic performance, growing faster, more sustainably than most of our peer countries, if not all of them. And Mr Speaker, we're confident about the courage and the hope and the aspirations of so many New Zealanders who in the last few weeks and months have got off benefit, and so their children are among the 50,000 fewer that are in welfare-dependent households. We're confident about the young women who think and get on with starting their online business, selling to the world in a way that probably shouldn't happen in theory, but in practice they're making it happen every day. We're confident that our primary production sector can deal with the environmental challenges that will help to reinforce our clean green brand around the world and drive up the value of our products, Mr. Speaker, because we are going forward. 3% growth for the next 5 years in the forecast. 3% growth for the next 5 years. Under 5% unemployment. The lowest numbers of people on benefit in 20 years. The highest proportion of New Zealanders in work ever. Ever. Rising surpluses and falling government debt. Mr. Speaker, this is better than the good old days. This is better than the good old days, particularly because so many people have work, and particularly because the economy consistently keeps delivering not just lots of new jobs, but more than we expect. Now, of course, the opposition parties sneer at it. The person who got off benefit and took a job at the rest home, that's low productivity. Apparently we'd be better off without that and to have high productivity. Well, Mr. Speaker, they won't get to be high productivity until they get the first job. The thousands of young New Zealanders who have gone into apprenticeships, more than ever, better than the good old days. Yes, they're low productivity. I agree. If you're 17 and you just got onto the building site and the biggest construction boom this country has seen in 2 generations, yes, you're low productivity, but I want to say to that apprentice, girl, we're proud of you. And Mr. Speaker, the other reason this could only be done by a national-led government is because of the political stability that this government represents. And I want to acknowledge the Māori Party, United Future and the ACT Party, because we have some hard-edged discussions. But now, over a period of time, we've been able to create a way of looking ahead, making decisions and getting things done that are good for New Zealand, that represent a higher common purpose despite our sometimes quite divergent views. And I want to pay respects to the integrity and the transparency and the honesty that those parties bring to this stable government. Because this year, New Zealand gets to think about the alternative. And I'm looking forward to it. A Labour Green government led by Winston Peters. And we know that because he's going around telling everybody. But for good reason. For good reason. There hasn't been a leader of the major opposition party that's polled 4th on preferred Prime Minister. And I've been wondering, but look, it's not a matter of what the public think about it or what we think about it. It's what Andrew Little's own party thinks about it. Because I've been watching the performance of 2 of the best educated, smartest, apparently most dynamic politicians of the left in the last generation, Ms Ardern and Grant Robertson, and it's been pretty poor. It's been pretty poor. They're not trying. Surely they're better than this. Surely. But the plot is unfolding because the wise head of the Labour Party, the balanced, wise, considered Annette King, they dispatched her, and now they look nothing more like than 2 happy undertakers. the double crew ambulance that is going to wheel off the leader of the Labor Party.
Order. Order.
Mr. Speaker, that's why Winston Peters feels like he's on a roll, because he's watching the Labor Party sink under the weight of its own mediocrity, inertia and irrelevance. Mr. Speaker, that's what, because, well, how are they going to, if they want to make themselves relevant, they should work out how to vote, at least for parts of this budget. Are they going to vote for 1,125 more police staff? No. No, they won't. Are they going to vote for double crewing ambulances? No. Are they? Not now. Are they going to vote for 20 to 30% pay increases for the minimum wage rest home and home care workers? No, they're not. Are they going to vote for building 34,000 houses? No. What they're going to do, apparently, we've spent a bit of time on this, they apparently are going to build 4 times as many houses with less money than we've allocated on land that they don't own. So that'll work. Mr. Speaker. And that's actually before I've got to the announcements made today. Mr. Speaker, and I want to congratulate the Minister of Finance on the announcements made today. We've worked closely together on all the other budgets, and it's fantastic to see Stephen Joyce delivering a budget that seizes the opportunities, and it is different now. We have a lot more positive choices but the same discipline. And that's where Stephen Joyce understands absolutely how government runs, how the economy runs, and where the money can and should be spent. And actually, it's harder to manage surpluses and deficits. As a finance minister, I could just say no. He has to find 53 ways of saying yes. And today he's managed to find them. So I want to acknowledge his huge effort, because today, Mr. Speaker, 1.3 million families will be, on average, from 1 April next week, $26 a week better off next year. I agree. And the lowest income 150,000 families will be, on average, $36 a week better off. In addition to that, on the 1st of April next year, 750,000 superannuitants will get a bigger increase than they expected, and couples will get an extra $13 a week and singles $8 a week. Why? Because after-tax incomes are higher. That's why you don't listen to anything the opposition say about after-tax incomes. They're higher. That's how superannuitants get twice the rate of inflation increases over the last 4 or 5 years. And the other reason is because you have a government that can run all the expenditure it needs to run and have lower taxes. That's why. That's the only way you get those sort of increases. So, Mr. Speaker, let's look at the impact that a strong and growing economy can have for a family, say, since 2014. Well, free doctor visits for under 13s. Let's think about, Josie in Lower Hutt. Her older children now more likely to achieve NCA, actually particularly if they're Māori or Pacifica, where the rates have gone up from the low 50s to the mid-70s, like around a 40% increase in the number of those children who achieve NCA level 2. If she was on a benefit, the 1st of April last year, $25 a week extra for every beneficiary household with children. And her chances of getting work greatly increased because of 200,000 new jobs over the last 3 years. Let's say she got a job in the rest home at the minimum wage, which has gone up every year, and now faces the prospect of a 20 to 30% wage increase and a path to qualification and skill levels in the growing aged care industry. And when she did that, her children became some of those 50,000 fewer children on a benefit-dependent household. And if she had more children and was paying higher rent, particularly if she had very high rent in Lower Hutt, the benefits of the accommodation supplement could be $50, $60, $70 a week. Because in this budget, Stephen Joyce has made sure that those with the highest housing costs get the biggest benefit. It's that simple. And Mr Speaker, one figure he didn't mention is this OECD measure of low income, that is households below 50% of the median wage, the median income. Today, we've made announcements which mean at the 1st of April next year, there will be 50,000 fewer children under that threshold by the 1st of April, which amounts to about a 30% reduction in that measure of child poverty, although there's many other measures, that's just one. So, Mr Speaker, the families benefit from that. A whole lot of other people are going to benefit as well, because one of the big debates in this election campaign is going to be between those who think that spending money shows you care, which is the opposition, and those who think you show you care by changing lives. That's us. It's that basic. And Mr Speaker, we heard it in the leader of the opposition speech. Here's the difference. The National-led government wants to, now listen to this carefully, wants by 2021 to have a 25% reduction in the rate of hospitalisations of children for preventable conditions. And we all know that's a huge challenge. We're learning how to take it on from the Rheumatic Fever Project. Thousands of kids who turn up with respiratory diseases, cellulitis, asthma, all things that are avoidable. What does Labor want? Labor wants the demographically adjusted, CPI adjusted, real increase with the technology factor and the population bit for more money. That's what they want. We want healthier children. They want more money. In education, we want to deal individually with the kids who need more help to get over the line. Labor just want more money. Well, and if they, oh, that's right. If they don't want, you're right. Sometimes it's not more money. The other one is a review. A review. So mental health's a really big issue. I've had 9 years to think about it, and I thought we'll have a review. That's how the 15th Labor health spokesperson justifies their policy. So, Mr Speaker, it's the same with serious crime. What I'm very pleased about in this budget is, as a result of the tools we're using, called social investment, we're getting into very granular understandings of not just who's got a low income, but exactly what type of other issues trap them there. And one big motivation for that is that when you've got a growing economy, you want everyone to be able to get on that bus. And the fact is that even with a lot of even with some of our households, even if they have more income, it still won't change the toxic mix of offending welfare dependency, family violence that traps them where they are. And, Mr Speaker, we are unashamedly addressing the hardcore of New Zealand's longest-run social problems. And in this budget, there's 14 initiatives that do that. And I want to pay tribute here to public servants who I know find it difficult to fit the model. That creates a lot of tension and sometimes a bit of frustration. But we're making some progress, because what's the point in having a government if it can't deal with the most complex, the most vulnerable, and those who, under Labor's model of mass funding run by their union mates get forgotten as they did under the last Labor government. So, Mr Speaker, as Stephen Joyce said, the only reason we can have these conversations is because we've got a strong economic plan that is underlying a strong economy. And if we can have 3% growth for 5 years, that would give New Zealand one of the longest periods of 3% growth it has had for a long time. And in that context, we can achieve things in the next 5 years we could not have even thought of 5 years ago. We can achieve more in our markets, more in our innovation, more in our growth of employment, more in our infrastructure where we're making a huge investment, and more for the most vulnerable New Zealanders who, of course, want to come along for the ride.
Order. Members, please resume their seats. James Shaw.
E te mangai o te whare, tēnā koe. Kia koutou, huri noa e te whare ngā mihi o te wā, kia koutou katoa. Mr Speaker, the Stephen Joyce who stood up to give that speech looked and sounded like somebody who actually wanted to do something for low and middle income New Zealanders, but the Stephen Joyce who wrote the budget, who actually filled in the detail below the headline, was an entirely different person. So would the real Stephen Joyce please stand up? Mr Speaker, the big headline in today's budget is, of course, this $2 billion family income package. And after 9 years of making lives harder for low-income families, now, in an election year, National makes yet another headline-grabbing announcement to make it look like they're doing something about it. And it sounds great, but a quick glance at today's announcement suggests the following things. Mr Speaker, on the one hand, they say that they're increasing family tax credits for some people, but on the other hand, the abatement rates will be higher and they will cut in earlier. They give with one hand and they take away with the other. The changes to income taxes go well beyond simply resetting thresholds to take account of inflation. And as always with these guys, as always, the largest share of the tax cuts go to those on the highest incomes. Families who are on more than $127,000 a year get a tax cut of $33.22 a week, whilst those on $24,000 a year or less get $5.34 a week. I'm just going to say that again, Mr Speaker. Families on $127,000 or more get $33 a week back in their tax cuts, whilst those on $24,000 a year or less get only $5.34, and that is in their package. Mr Speaker, this so-called $2 billion family incomes package is just another tax cut for those on the highest incomes in disguise. And it reminds me a little bit of Budget 2015 when they announced so-called benefit tax cuts, benefit increases of $25 a week. And that sounded great too, until we realised later that fully half of all beneficiary families with children didn't get the full $25. In fact, many, got nothing at all. And that is the thing about this government. They are the masters of the shell game. New Zealand, Stephen Joyce's first and final budget, along with unprecedented waves of pre-budget announcements, shows one thing. National may be out of touch, but they are very in tune with their polling data. So they have set about to look very, very busy indeed. But looking busy is not the same as actual results. So let's talk about their actual results. They wanted to be tested on their record. Let's talk about their record. Climate change. National says they're super ambitious on climate, But in the last 9 years, since they came to office, New Zealand's greenhouse gas emissions have risen 19%. Rivers. National says that they're cleaning them up, but 9 years of a national government and you cannot swim in 62% of our rivers without the risk of catching some horrible disease. Conservation. National says that they're doing everything they can to save our endangered species, but they've got no problem with a coal mine and a kiwi habitat on conservation land. Transport. National says that new motorways will drive productivity, but after 9 years of a national government, Aucklanders now spend as much time sitting in traffic as they do on vacation every year. Energy. National says they want 90% renewable electricity, but New Zealand gets a lower percentage of its electricity from renewable sources now than it did in 1980. On productivity, National says that they're spending more on RNZ grants in this budget, but after 9 years of a national government, we are still spending less than half of the OECD average on RNZ in this country. And in the Māori economy, National says that they are improving well-being and job opportunities for Māori, but after 9 years of a national government, Māori unemployment is still twice the national average. It hasn't budged in 9 years. On housing, after 9 years of a national government, New Zealand is the most unaffordable country in the world to buy a house, and we have 40,000 homeless people in this country. 40,000. Today's increase to the accommodation supplement is an admission of failure, Mr. Speaker. It is a failure to build more houses. It is a failure to keep housing affordable. The accommodation supplement that takes taxpayer money and gives it to private landlords, if the government had actually built more of its own social housing stock, that money would come back to the government to be reinvested. Now, Stephen Joyce says that he wants New Zealanders to judge National on their record, and it is a broken record. Housing, broken. Our rivers, broken. The climate, broken. Transport, broken. But we can change this, Mr. Speaker. New Zealanders can change this, and we just need to change the government. This government, it reminds me of one of those tired old bands that keeps touring the world, playing their old hits, talking about the good old days with that old lead singer that they used to have. The problem is, the songs weren't even that good the first time around. It's time to give it up, guys. There's a new supergroup in town. Now, Mr. Speaker, Kiwis are generally a pretty happy and tolerant lot, but 9 years is a long time to put your trust in a government that is big on announcements and short on results. I mean, can we really trust National to make our rivers swimmable again when, after 9 years, our rivers and our lakes and our aquifers are even more polluted and degraded than when they were when they came to office? Budget 2017 seeks another $90 million into subsidies for industrial irrigation, which will only make things worse. The braided rivers of Canterbury are on the verge of vanishing forever. Close Ford is an ankle-deep puddle. More than 60% of our monitored rivers are now unsafe to swim in. The Land and Water Forum has broken down under National. They no longer trust this government to act in good faith, saying on the one hand that they want to clean up our rivers, whilst on the other hand they're subsidising the very things that make that impossible. Instead of trying to fix the problem, National is doing what it always does, trying to wring a few more dollars out of a broken system before the public catches on. Our rivers are too precious to be spoiled in National's short-sighted pursuit of a quick buck. And, Mr. Speaker, what of our children's future? Can we still trust National to protect our climate and move our economy towards a low-carbon future? And yes, sure, they signed up to the Paris Agreement, committing us to a low-carbon economy. But at the same time, under their stewardship, New Zealand's greenhouse gas emissions have been getting steadily worse. They're now 19% higher than when this government came to power, and they continue to rise and rise and rise. Budget 2017 makes things worse, Mr. Speaker. These guys are still stuck in the 1950s, thinking that they can spend $9 on motorways for every $1 they spend on rail. More pollution, more congestion for Aucklanders. The National Government's failure to take meaningful action on climate change means that we are going to have to pay other countries to reduce their pollution so that we don't have to. And that is going to cost us a fortune, Mr. Speaker. The Green Party revealed this week Cabinet briefing papers that estimate that the cost of National's inaction on climate change is going to cost us at least $14 billion over 10 years. That's nearly $1.5 billion every year just to buy carbon credits overseas. It is a massive transfer of New Zealand wealth overseas, and that is at today's prices. When the price of carbon increases, we will be stuck with a bill that makes our looming superannuation bill look teeny by comparison. Now, we still have a small opportunity to act. New Zealand's got the resources and the clean energy expertise to meet the climate challenge and to show the rest of the world how it's done. This is, in fact, one of the greatest economic opportunities in at least a generation, one that National is simply letting slide on by while they have their heads buried under the sea, looking for oil. If you want to live in a country that isn't crippled by climate debt, one that is truly sustainable, with innovative, meaningful, well-paying jobs, you need to vote to change the government before that window of opportunity closes. Mr. Speaker, this year we estimate that the Department of Conservation will have $53 million less to invest in protecting nature than it did in 2008. That amounts to a cumulative budget cut of $422 million since National started cutting. These long-term budget cuts have resulted in fewer frontline rangers on the ground protecting our most precious and vulnerable birds from further decline and extinction. It also means we have fewer scientists discovering new ways of doing conservation smarter. After 9 years, can we really trust National to protect the wild spaces that we love when they're happy to starve nature's frontline defenders whilst handing out fat subsidies to oil companies to drill in the Maui's dolphin sanctuary? I mean, give me a break. Only a vote for the Green Party in 121 days' time will restore DOC funding for nature and create a whole lot of good jobs out in the regions where they're needed the most. Now, Mr. Speaker, there's been a lot of talk about social investment. National's big idea is to use big data to target social spending more accurately, especially when it comes to our most vulnerable children, in order to reduce future governments' fiscal liability. Mr. Speaker, children are not a liability. They are our greatest asset. And you don't target children, you care for them. Everyone knows the old saying that it's better to build a fence at the top of the cliff rather than have an ambulance waiting at the bottom. And the Greens have argued for decades that investing a little bit more up front in things like early childhood education will enable our children to grow up to be thriving adults with strong families and good jobs. Social investment has the potential to be the holy grail of social policy, an evidence-based approach to building a 21st century welfare system that actually does what it is intended to do, to lift families out of long-term, intergenerational cycles of poverty and exclusion and into ever-increasing cycles of inclusion and opportunity. But how can you trust a national government to deliver on that promise when, at its heart, they are simply using the language of social investment to cloak 9 years of cutting social spending in order to deliver Stephen Joyce's small state dream? National are not building a fence at the top of the cliff. They're leaving a tangle of barbed wire on the edge and hoping that nobody trips over it and falls over. If Stephen Joyce truly believed that people mattered, National would have curbed their instincts to blame and bully beneficiaries. If Stephen Joyce truly cared about our most vulnerable families, National would have reacted very differently to the stories of indifference and bureaucratic blockheadedness that regularly encountered in government agencies like ACC or SIFS or income support and in our prisons. When times are, at least theoretically, so good for the New Zealand economy, explain to me why people who are working, who have jobs and are doing more than 40 hours a week in those jobs are living in cars.
Why are they living in cars?
Why are people who are working 40 hours a week or more living in cars? Why are New Zealand's houses so cold and so damp that there are 40,000 visits by kids to the emergency rooms every winter because their homes make them sick? Why do 1,600 people die in the winter months every year compared to the rest of the year? Mr. Speaker, New Zealand's homes kill 5 times more people every year than the road toll. And this government killed off the very home insulation scheme that was designed to save those lives. Social investment. Give me a break. The home insulation scheme had a benefit to cost ratio of 6 to 1. This government understands the cost of everything and the value of nothing. Mr. Speaker, yesterday the Prime Minister posted a survey on his Facebook feed asking his followers what sort of pie he should eat today. The answer is humble pie. Budget 2017 disappoints in its lack of a big vision for our great nation and a lack of self-belief that we can actually solve the great challenges of our time if we change the direction that we are heading in. We can have rivers that we can swim in. We can lift tens of thousands of children out of poverty. We can fix the housing crisis. We can show the world what it takes to have a truly sustainable economy that works for and includes everyone. Budget 2017 will not be the defining political moment of this year. That moment belongs to the people of New Zealand at election 2017. And after 9 years of national government, it is time to change the government, and change is coming. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa.
Mr. Speaker.
The Right Honourable Winston Peters.
No, this is not for you, Jerry. These are tins. T-I-N-S. There is no surplus. Any fool can see that. And what we had today was a willful, wanton, weak, wobbly, woeful minister with a willful, wanton, weak, wobbly, woeful budget, and they're going to lose the next election big time. The most worried people watching me right now are those good, hard-working, loyal National Party voters that know this won't cut it. Because out there in their homeland and in the provinces and the region, there is nothing for them at all. Here was the claim by Mr. Joyce, 200,000 more jobs in the last 3 years. And to get on that list, you just have to work 1 hour a week. Who can possibly believe in that sort of hypocrisy? Then they talked about their growth rate. It is actually 2.8%, and if you take out the 2% of population growth, that's 0.8%, and that's down the bottom of the OECD. You cannot believe these people. And I know those national supporters out there who remember the likes of Holyoake and Holland and all those other people when they were a worthy party, know that these people, and the polls show it, are just a bunch of useless, hopeless, lazy, idle, in the main old, used by date, well-gone members of Parliament. And they've got something to do with tins. They've got a tin ear. They don't listen. They don't care. And this budget showed it. Mr. Speaker, budgets are meant to be about philosophy. They're meant to be what demarcates our party against all the others. They're meant to be about a plan, a vision, which every sporting and cultural or business enterprise knows you must have, except the National Party came in today with no plan, no vision, no idea, just trying to hang on for 3 more years. So Jerry doesn't have to do any work. So that some have to go back to their tawdry, hopeless former life when they never had a real job in the first place. They don't know what it's like to make a lot of money in business at all. They came here because they're political and business failures. Well, don't laugh at me, I do. I got a record of making some serious money when I had a practice in a law firm. More than anybody over there made. And I can prove that with the greatest of ease. But I gave up that life for the people and cause of this country, and I've never regretted it. Never regretted it. Mr. Speaker, did you like the way he reeled out billions and billions and billions of dollars all over 4 years? He never gave a comparison against 2008. He never gave a comparison against what they do in Australia, Canada, Scandinavia and all the first world countries. No, he thought he could confuse people with big figures, and then the cacophony of clowns got up, and what they do? They clapped him. Unbelievable. I have never seen so many sheep going to the slaughter clapping their way to it. Not one Judas goat, about 25 of them, all on the back bench, and they won't be here after the next election. They believe, and they said it again today, they believe in globalisation. They believe in mass immigration. UK target of 65 million people, UK target, net 100,000. New Zealand today, 4.7 million. Our target, 72,000 as we speak. All cramming into Auckland, spilling over, and every social service is under massive stress with a housing crisis which says today to a young student at university, when you leave, it's going to be 3 times as hard as your parents to get a house. That's the legacy of this party. Oh, they're not smiling now, are they? Oh, no. I can tell you at home they're all looking down at their notes. They're all fascinated by their correspondence. Some of them are reading the budget again, trying to make head or tail of it, because they can see it might have been the longest suicide note in history for them. That's what's going on here. Let me tell you how bad these globalists are, because, you know, they don't pay attention to the rest of the world, whether it be Brexit, whether it be the United States, whether it be Australia. But the Chinese government recently is changing regulations to put capital gains tax on properties held overseas. And guess what? Just the other day, Chinese investors rushing to buy land in New Zealand. 2 examples. Massey University sold land to Wyburns, who then on-sold to a Chinese investor at a massive profit. They didn't care what the profit was. They wanted to get that land in New Zealand, they got it. Auckland Golf Course sold land to Mansons, who on-sold to a Chinese investor at twice the market value. Just 2 examples. And we sold more land offshore last year, 5 times more than the previous year. These people are land agents for a foreign culture and for foreign economies. And the very last thing they'll ever do is stand up for you. When we sought to have a register of land and homes in this country so we might know what's going on, these people over here opposed it, because they want you to be like their caucus. They want the mushroom principle. They want you in the dark permanently. And our job is here is to shine some light on what's going on in this country. That was a hopeless budget speech, appalling. And then to top it off, usually they go from the sublime to the ridiculous, but it was ridiculous to pathetic. Up gets Bill English. And now when you see people standing in a certain way, you know psychologically how they are. When somebody goes like that, that means he's open to all sorts of attack because he knows he's got something to hide. And he did most of that. No, yes, I'm just showing for the benefit of Simple Simon, Simon of Tauranga, I'm showing those people there the way he was standing. And you know what he said? And you know what he said? You're doing that now. I mean, do these guys become ministers in a raffle? Unbelievable. He claimed a surplus of 1.7 billion. He claimed a surplus of 1.7 billion. If I'm looking at roading, there's 1.7 billion short already. If I'm looking at railways, 1.7 billion short already. If I look at the Cullen Fund, which they're not contributing to, that's 2 billion already. If I look at our hospital system, that's 1.7 to 2 billion already. And they claim a surplus, whilst out there, when the struggle is real, they do nothing whatsoever, and that's the reason why they should lose. They have forgotten what they stand for. That party used to be called a national party with a capital N. Now they're the international party, the puppets of every other society and every other people but ours. That's how bad they are. And if they think they're going to win the next election, as Muhammad Ali would say, if they even dream they're going to win the next election, they should wake up and apologise. Unbelievable. Unbelievable. Family poverty, mental health services in disarray, the conservation estate and services in dismay, because the only work that's going in is if it can help tourists, and to hell with New Zealanders and their legacy. Social housing in motels, 100,000 a night now. Science, research and technology in disarray. Any figures today about what they're going to put into science, technology and GDP as against GDP? So we can have a comparison with Singapore and all the smart countries? No, no comparison at all. Runaway immigration, house price inflation going through the roof, infrastructure deficits in every town, city and over the regions and provinces, utter neglect. Utter neglect. And the New Zealand Super Fund, as I say, if we were contributing $2 billion a year, then there would be no surplus. We'd be down 300 million today. That is the truth. That is the truth. Unbelievable. And here we go. Oh, here we go. This is the person shouting out here is a man called Jerry Brownlee. If you're down Christchurch, you'll know who he is, because down there they call him Mr. Useless, Mr. Do Nothing, Mr. Slow as you go. And they made him a foreign minister. And the most amazing thing about that is he doesn't even know where Canada is. And the first thing he did was insult one of our old friends. Unbelievable. And then he goes over to Australia, and I bet the Aussies thought, good God, what's coming here? What have we got here? And then he calls the foreign minister Prime Minister. Unbelievable. Non-trained. Been here for years. Been here for years. Unbelievable. Mr. Speaker, the real figure New Zealanders want to know today was, what is our GDP growth per person? Because when you know that, you'll know whether we're going that way or that way. And why would anybody with all those economists and all those high-paid people in Treasury not tell you what the GDP per person growth rate is, so you will know against the rest of the world how you're doing? Not a word, not a syllable, not a sound, not a mutter, not a murmur in this budget, because they believe in the budget of mushrooms as a principle. Don't tell the New Zealanders anything. Don't tell them, for example, that in most trades and most professions, if you're in Australia, look, don't try and shout me down. I'm having a conversation with real people. I'm having a conversation with the people of New Zealand. I'm not talking about people that spend all their time thinking about the next meal. I'm talking about the people who think about the next bill they got to pay. Because out there, the struggle, Mr. Brownlee, is real, and one party knows it and understands it and has answers for it. Did they tell you how they're going to grow the economy? Did they tell you, for example, that manufacturing against GDP in this country is declining? Did they tell you that exporting as opposed to GDP is declining? Did they tell you, for example, some of the most amazing things in this budget? But I'll get around to it very shortly. And then they got on and they said they're doing things for the Maori people. As though the Maori people are not like the rest of us. I mean, in this country, we've got red tape. We've got red tape, and under the National Party, we've got brown tape. That's what we got. Racism, separatism. But let me tell the Maori people out there, and there'll be a lot watching right now, up there in Hokianga and Kaitaia, because they would love to vote on our roll. And they ain't going to be voting for the National Party. But let me tell you this. After all the work that they said they have given and money they've given to the Maori Housing Network, 14.4 million in 2015 and 16, and 17.6 million in 16-17, and more in this budget, I want to ask those two members from the Maori Party here, who are here for the next 3 months, how many houses have they built? See what Marama Fox says? Opens her mouth, lets the wind blow her tongue around. But the answer out there in Maridom, if you are concerned about this, is they've built 11. 11 houses. That's at $2.8 million a house. And they aren't in Paradise Drive or Remuera. No, they're around the country. And they've consented 63 houses. That is, they've given them a consent. Now, let me ask you, can you live in a consent? How many people do you know living in consents? This is a sham. Separatism, racism, and in this campaign, the people of this country and in Maoridom, the followers will be legion, because the mass majority of Maori do not want your policies. The mass majority of Maori want a safe, affordable house. They want a decent health system should they fall ill. They want an education system to give their children an escalator for progress in life. And they want first world wages and first world jobs. Those four things are what Maoridom want. And come to think of it, that's what everyone wants. All around the world and in this country. And one party alone understands that. And that's why the Maori be lining up in their tens and tens of thousands in this campaign to back a party called New Zealand First. But of course, see, we're not separatists. We don't look at our race. We're not gender biased. We don't look at people's religion. We take on people because they've got a thing called talent. And it starts at the top. Speaker, let me just say, Mr. Joyce got up and he said that all these people, 1.2 million, like he said, 1.3 million families, are going to be $26 better off. And you know that famous line from the Shawshank Redemption, the movie? The colossal, I can't say the next word, but the colossal so-and-so even managed to sound magnanimous. $26. Now, ladies and gentlemen, in 2006, 7 and 8, we gave the minimum wage people $3 extra. We took it from $9 to $12 in 3 years flat. Multiply that by 40. How many extra dollars is that a week? Even Jerry should be able to work that out. Even Jerry should work that out. That's $26. We gave them over $120 if they're working Saturday as well, much more than that per week. And we did that 10 years ago. And you give us a chance, we'll do it again. But we'll make sure business, because of sound tax policy, is able to pay for it. That's the difference. You know, Mr. Joyce claimed a bit about it. He talked about economic growth. He said, the economy today, and I'm glad he said it, he said, the economy today is 14% larger than it was 5 years ago. We've looked behind the figures, take out inflation, then that means it's 9% growth in 5 years. That means 1.8% per year. Now take out the population growth of 2%, and we're not even going at 1% per year. And now more and more economists are beginning to understand that. But, you know, we've got people like somebody in the Herald today, he wrote, and you know the clown who wrote this, he said, the government was swimming in money. Tell that to the people in mental health institutions who are looking for a home, who are looking for a job, a decent job. Some of them got 3 jobs, who want to get rid of secondary tax and have a decent life. But here's the real rub for the benefit of the Maori Party, and it's this. Only yesterday, no, I saw you get up and clap, but only yesterday the overseas merchandise trade stats came out, and they revealed the stunning success of National's much vaunted, tiringly boastful export agenda. Guess what's happened? In the 12 months to April this year, the New Zealand merchandise exports grew by a staggering, listen to this, 0.2%. Multiply that by 10. That's 2% growth for a decade. And they get up here and say they've got a plan. They're a joke. Underneath the hype and misinformation, it's a fake budget that delivers nothing meaningful for ordinary New Zealanders and nothing to make our economy go faster. And it doesn't tell New Zealanders how they compare with the rest of the country. Ladies and gentlemen, there's an election on the 27th of September. 23rd of September. No, sorry, 23rd of September. You see, that's how I know they're listening. And that's how I know they're listening. I was thinking about the day we were all going to be down here as a huge caucus. And I got a bit ahead of myself. But there's an election on the 23rd of September. And in that campaign, on that day, on that vote, and the 2 weeks beforehand, people are going to have a chance whether they're going to vote for their province, their families, their communities, or for their politics. And right now, all the signs are showing that New Zealanders realise that they better put their hand up for their province, their region, and for their community. Because if they don't do that, then nothing will help them now. I have never seen such a disparity between the rich and the poor, now creeping into the middle class in all my life. And the great dream of people like Holyoake and others, when that party was a proud party, was a property-owning democracy with the greatest level of egalitarian equality of any society on earth. Look at it now, divisions everywhere. And even now in wealthy families, people who are poor because they're students with no chance of ever buying a home, unless mum and dad can give them $300,000 to $400,000 to get a start. And how many families who thought they were comfortable can afford that? But the National Party has no plan for housing. They're going to bring in the population of Rotorua every year for the next 10 years. But they won't build infrastructure. And if you look at the motorways in Auckland now on a Saturday morning, you'll know what a catastrophe this all is. This has been a day of bad and sad news. For 45 minutes, the people in this parliament and on that TV station and listening out there in New Zealand have had to put up with 45 minutes of sad, bad news. But I've got one piece of great news for everybody watching today and listening. I've got one piece of great news for everybody out there who's watching, and that's this. That was Stephen Joyce's first and last budget.
Speaker. The Honourable Te Urara Flavel.
Mr. Speaker, kia ora tata katoa.
Kia ora.
Mr. Speaker, that speech was beautiful. That speech was beautiful, was touching. It was so moving, I was almost moved to tears. Almost, but no. Because that was sad, sad news for Aotearoa. If that's what's coming round the corner, we're in trouble. E hoa, we are in big, big trouble. Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to stand on behalf of the Māori Party today to declare support for this budget and indeed support to the Honourable Mr. Joyce for delivering, I think, a good job. A good job. It must have been because the Māori Party was beside him.
That's right.
Mr. Speaker, as we say in Te Arawa, and this is a very important saying, the singer may have changed, but the waiata is exactly the same. Mr. Speaker, the Minister of Finance may be new, but with the help of the mighty Māori Party, there are some real goodies in this budget for the whānau. Mr. Speaker, whānau have always been at the heart of what we have been about as a Māori Party. From the first time we came into this House, we've talked whānau at all times, above all. Mr. Speaker, we've promoted whānau. We've been looking after whānau from day one, and the Māori Party, by the sounds of it, had our sticky fingers all over this budget because its focus has been on whānau. And so while, Mr. Speaker, it has been a National Party budget in some ways, I can say the huge footprint of the Māori Party is over this budget in looking at supporting whānau. Mr. Speaker, like the predecessor, he sees the value of innovative approaches to tackling issues affecting Māori. Mr. Speaker, Bill English, as the Prime Minister in his time, as Minister of Finance in his time, he worked closely with the Māori Party, and I'm pleased to say that Stephen Joyce has done a similar approach, recognising that we as the Māori Party are all about tackling issues up front and head on. We want to contribute, not get angry, not go wild, not lose the head, not do the spin, but actually we want to contribute in a positive way. So I'm saddened by the fact that, Mr. Peters voted against treaty settlements again and again and again, because that's what they do. Voted against housing projects like Point England, voted against anything to do with Chinese names. He's up for it because it's election time. As soon as we hit election time, pull out the racism card. It's a winner every time. So that's the sort of sad approach that's happened. Mr. Speaker, I want to say this. You got to be in the game. You got to be in the game. You can't play the game from the sidelines. You need to be in the game. And sometimes, Mr. Speaker, we need someone to blow the whistle a few times, attract a bit of attention and get results. But you cannot get anything unless you're at the field. And so, as I say, at the table we are, and we will continue to be, and support any initiatives that assist Māori people. Mr. Speaker, being at the table as a support party for the national government, we have secured and influenced, hold on, here it is, more than $2 billion worth of gains in the budget. Only $2 billion. No, hold on, there's more. Actually, more than $2 billion. More than $2 billion. Those in opposition that are yelling at me at the moment, hold on, what have they gained over the last 9 years? Kore! Nothing. Zilch. Zip. Naught. Nothing. That's what they've achieved. And yet they got the cheek to come into this house and have a go at the two Māori Party members of Parliament who sit next to the government and get more than $2 billion, Mr. Speaker. It's a good day to be in the Māori Party. Mr. Speaker, that means $2 million more in whānau ora in this year's budget. $2 million, that's $10 million. And it's $10 million more than that lot have got. I'll tell you that. But hold on, Mr. Speaker, there's more. That's right. Yeah, hold on. The thing, that's the difference between us, eh? That's right. We just talk to each other. They got to ask Willie. They got to ask Willie. Or Andrew. Either way, they got to ask somebody. Not like you and mine. No. Back off, get down the back. Settle down, boys. So that's what's happened. But Mr. Speaker, we've got $10 million for Marae. Let's hear it. Is somebody going to speak up about $10 million against Marae? Shh. They are going to speak up against Marae. They're going to speak up against Marae, Mr. Speaker. Hold on, here's another one. $21 million for Māori language and culture initiative. They did it again. They spoke up against Māori language and culture because that's what they do in the Labour Party. They speak against things Māori. Gains for Māori, Mr. Speaker, that's what we're on about. Every day, every month, and any dollar we get today is better than the dollar we didn't have yesterday. So we're on a roll, Mr. Speaker, and we're here to make gains. So watch this space. Mr. Speaker, just in case there's any for the people of Whanganui, I need to tell them, Mr. Speaker, $122 million in this budget, Mr. Speaker. I know you're the Speaker, and I want to clap, but I'll let you off today, Mr. Speaker. $122 million in the budget. Mr. Speaker, the heart of this budget, we have ways to allow people to move into home ownership. Hold on, let's see if they talk about moving into home ownership. Shh. Let's listen. Did it again. Not again. They spoke against home ownership, Mr. Speaker. It's so sad. My people, whakarongo, listen to this. Unbelievable. And so, here's the point, Mr. Speaker. if you want to have people speak against things Māori, look one to New Zealand First and look two to the Labour Party, because that's what they do. And I'm really sad about that, Mr. Speaker, because we're all different. We're all in different shapes and sizes and clearly in different political parties. Mr. Speaker, our solution is to look across the board to try and find solutions for our people. So, man, there's been some gains in this budget, unbelievable. But I expect, of course, and I'll be clear here, that Māori are overrepresented in statistics, some statistics. But you don't just moan. The idea is don't moan about it, do something about it. And for too long, the Labour Party, in fact, for 9 years, have moaned and moaned and moaned. And what has the Māori Party done? We've moved and will continue to move forward. That's what we're about. So, in fact, I can say this. An extra 2,500 whānau, sir, will be reached by whānau ora through this budget. And that's on top of the 11,500 who have already been supported just in this last year. So we're supporting looking after whānau. So hold on, some more whānau to get help in this budget. Let's listen. Oh, they did it again, not again. That's 4 times, Mr. Speaker. That's shocking. That's unbelievable. So, Mr. Speaker, let's just check on one more. So we got the Ture Whenua Māori bill going through the House. We got $32 million to build a Māori land service that's going to look after Māori land. $32 million all ready to go. That's just the first part. Hold on. Shh. Oh, number 5. I got 5, Mr. Speaker. I'd go for 6, but I'm running out of time. In fact, Mr. Speaker, I'm pretty sure that no matter what I said, that lot would speak against it, against more than $4 billion of money for Māori communities in this land. Mr. Speaker, $4 billion. That's right, over the length and breadth of the time that the Māori Party has been in health. But hold on. Let's see if they know how much money they got in the last 9 years. Shh. 9 years. Let's just check. Oh, yeah, where? Oh, yeah. Where did you see any money around at all from the Labour Party for the nowhere? That's where nowhere, Mr. Speaker. So I can say, Mr. Speaker, this is a good to be in the Māori Party. And hey, Mr. Speaker, the main thing is, Mr. Speaker, and here's the big pitch. All by 2 people. Gains that have been made. So I'm looking forward to the election because the Māori Party is on fire when the shark and the fox rock your house.
David Seymour.
Mr. Speaker, they say that the definition of insanity is to do the same thing again and again, expecting a different result. And I'm not sure that Te Reo Flavel is guilty of insanity, but having far too much hope in the Labour Party. Mr. Speaker, I rise in support of this budget. And I support this budget and this government because I'm the alternative. Andrew Little, for the first time that I've ever seen, failed to even use his allocated speaking time. He had so little to say. New Zealand First, we just heard from Winston Peters, and it was a comic routine, but there is no substance behind it. What a joke. Look at his op-ed in the New Zealand Herald this morning, raising R&D expenditure to 2% of GDP. Well, the government can very easily do that, but simply pursuing a certain amount of money spent on something is not the same as getting a result. Mr. Speaker, this budget has one very good aspect to it, and that is relief for taxpayers. Raising the thresholds is a victory for acts and acts thinking, because we've been on this for over 2 years relentlessly, saying that bracket creep, which has taken money out of hard-working New Zealanders' pockets week after week after week in greater amounts every year, is fundamentally wrong. So we applaud the government for doing that. But once you get past those minor tax adjustments, which are going to take around about $1 of expenditure for every $7 of new expenditure that the government is bringing in at this budget, there's not much more good news. Mr. Speaker, I looked from Labor to National and National to Labor and then all the way back to National again, and it gets very hard to see any difference. This is a budget that is a tax and spend budget. It is a vote-buying budget, and it's a budget that's designed to buy votes with other people's money. The transfers to working for families are a policy once described by the National Party as communism by stealth. Well, Mr. Speaker, Finance Minister Steve is wearing the hammer and sickle proudly on his sleeve today as this government expands transfers from taxpayers to recipients of middle-class welfare. And what about the transfers that will take place from taxpayers to landlords in the form of the increased accommodation supplement? Because, Mr. Speaker, if you don't have a large or even really any increase in the number of properties being built in New Zealand, if you give more money to people to rent the same properties, you know what's going to happen. Prices are going to go up. In this case, rents are going to go up. It is an enormous transfer of wealth from the taxpayer to the holders of all too scarce rental property. So, Mr. Speaker, those are the criticisms of this budget. It is a tax and spend budget. It is a politically calculated budget. It is the kind of budget that we used to expect from Michael Cullen. Mr. Speaker, the fact of the matter is that what this government should have done is cut taxes, and specifically it should have cut them by the $24 billion of forecast surplus that the budget estimates tell us are coming down the line in the next 4 years. Rather than taking all of that money off hard-working New Zealanders and their businesses, we should have given it back to them by allowing to keep the money they earn in the first place through tax cuts. And the ACT Party has shown how New Zealand could have a top income tax rate of 25 cents in the dollar without cutting any spending. In fact, we wouldn't only not cut spending, we would allow it to increase by $14 billion as forecast in the coming 4 years and deliver a top tax rate of 25 cents. We'd drop the bottom tax rate to 10 cents and we'd drop the 17.5% rate to 15. 3 tax rates, 10, 15, 25. Nobody should pay more than a quarter of their income in taxes, and that was completely possible in this budget just by giving back the surplus that this government will now keep for the next 4 years. And just remember that a government surplus is a taxpayer deficit. But what about infrastructure? We have a huge problem in infrastructure because we cannot build enough homes. And we cannot build enough homes because we do not have enough infrastructure to get to the sections and the lands where people would like to build them. Well, Mr. Speaker, in ACT's budget, we would have given half the GST on construction to the council that consents it. A simply beautiful way of achieving the outcome of transferring an extra $1.2 billion in infrastructure spending, all within the budget figures that I've just presented with a 25% top tax rate and money left to spare. It would have given $1.2 billion to councils to build infrastructure so that people could build homes. And it was so beautifully simple, it was automatic, it wouldn't have required any photo opportunities, it just would have transferred money to the councils that get on with consenting and building. That's what this government should have done. And the other thing it should have done is thought about business. Because the fact of the matter is that there is nothing in this budget for business at all, unless you happen to be one of the favoured few businesses that provide enough photo opportunities to get grants from some of the honeypots this government likes to keep largely for publicity purposes. And that is a shame. X would have reduced the company tax rate to 25 cents, and we would have done it by cutting the $1 billion of corporate welfare that this government hands out in return for photo opportunities for ministers each and every year. But, Mr. Speaker, there's something much bigger that is not in this budget that should be, and that is of great concern to New Zealanders under 40. And, Mr. Speaker, that is the question of making superannuation sustainable. And I now stand here as the only millennial political party leader and the only person in this House prepared to say that superannuation, as it stands, is not sustainable, and that we need leadership rather than putting our heads in the sand on this issue, because the Retirement Commissioner that the taxpayer pays for and the Treasury that the taxpayer pays for, in fact, every time the government pays for a report on the sustainability of superannuation, they tell us we have to make adjustments. And you have to wonder why the government doesn't either take their advice or stop paying them to produce these reports. Because the fact of the matter is there are currently 4 taxpayer-age New Zealanders for every superannuitant, and in 20 years' time there will be only 2. That is not sustainable. And the ACT Party in this budget, which has a 4-year time frame or forecast, would have begun to raise the age of entitlement to national superannuation by 2 months a year in 2020, taking that age to 67 by 2032. That would be fair, Mr. Speaker. That would mean that all generations would be involved in an adjustment that has to happen, instead of what the current government is saying to millennials, which is we acknowledge there's a problem, we're going to make an adjustment, but we're not going to make it until 2037. That means we're going to tax your generation $58 billion to give super at 65 and 66, and then we're going to pull the rug out just as you become eligible. Mr. Speaker, this budget is far better than anything the opposition could possibly have put forth, and yet it still carries so many imperfections, so many long-term issues in housing and infrastructure funding. It lacks a commitment to the basic proviso on which the National Party was formed, that people's property belongs primarily to them and the government takes it only where necessary. That's what the $24 billion of excessive taxation, of surplus, is about. And if this government stayed true to its principles, then what it would have done is taken that money, taken those forecasts, and let people keep it with a maximum tax rate of 25%. And people might be interested in what that means to them in practical terms. If you want to find out how much money you could have saved under X tax policy, go to www.act.org.nz/tax, punch in your numbers and find out just how much this government's reluctance to stick up for the taxpayer has cost you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Peter Dunn.
Mr. Speaker, can I begin by expressing my congratulations to the Minister of Finance on the production of his first budget. I know how much he has been looking forward to today and how much effort has gone into its preparation, and I just want to, at a personal level, congratulate him on that achievement. He's one of very few members in this House who will get the opportunity to present a budget, and he should savour every moment that he has in that respect. Mr. Speaker, the next thing I want to say is that no budget is prepared in isolation. Every budget is a reflection of the context of the times. And the context that lies behind this budget is a very fragile one. Since about 2010-2011, this country has been going through a period of steady economic growth, about 6 years. That is one of our longest periods of sustained growth in the last half-century or more. 6 years. It is not very long, which shows the frailty of the economic cycle. This budget projects growth over the next 4 years. Time will tell the accuracy of those projections. But effectively what we have is a budget that is a moment in time. And I think that the approach taken has been a prudent one of saying that there are areas where we need to spend more, where we need to make adjustments, where we can afford to because we have a surplus at this time, but they cannot be where it begins and ends. I see this budget as a building blocks budget. The work that's been foreshadowed in terms of the increased social expenditure in health, education, welfare, justice is good generally, but it needs to be sustained year in, year out while the surpluses remain. The family assistance package, the 4 steps outlined there, again positive. But there is more to do in the future. We do need to be looking to a more fundamental reform of our tax system, both in terms of thresholds and rates and the interface between the tax and benefit system, for want of a better term. If you took the totality of expenditure across the family assistance package, working for families, tax changes, the income tax system, etc., there is the capacity for much more radical structural reform over a period of time, but that needs to be well founded on the base of good economic outcomes. We've talked in this House for years about the infrastructure deficit. We know where the problems are. It is good to see a substantial commitment being made to addressing those. But again, we've got to be very careful that we do not fall into the trap of saying we did all that in Budget 2017. We don't need to worry about these issues for the next number of years. Mr. Speaker, the point is that continuous improvement is what is going to continue to see this country progress, and perhaps address that very short window of about 5 years being our maximum period in recent times where we've enjoyed economic growth and prosperity. Now, I accept that a number of those factors are external and beyond our control, but it does highlight the fragility that this economy is constantly exposed to and the need to benefit productively from the gains while we can. Mr. Speaker, I think this budget strikes a good and proper balance, and I think what it does is foreshadow the types of improvements that can be made in the future. It has been a sobering contrast to listen to the debate this afternoon. An essential air of optimism from this side of the House, perhaps quite stated quietly but nonetheless clearly, versus a sustained barrage of negativity from the opposition. No clear policies, no sense of direction, no purpose, a sense of bitterness of anything else, that areas that they traditionally saw as being their babies are being addressed today. And, Mr. Speaker, I don't think that bodes well for the future of this country, because there will come a time many years from now when the political spectrum changes. And if there are no ideas, no optimism, no positivity, then this country's essential economic frailty will be exposed and we will begin the process of restructuring all over again. I think if we're going to have an election campaign as we are this year, it needs to be focused on a debate around sound ideas, not about how we recreate a better yesterday. I was in Christchurch recently, Mr. Speaker, and talking to social service providers down there who told me of an experience they had with 2 senior members of the Labour Party, talking about the social services that they were providing in Christchurch and the things that were being done. And then they said, these 2 senior members, the Deputy Leader and the Finance spokesman, said to them, look, that's all very well, but you shouldn't be doing it. And when they said, well, who should be? They said, the government. So butt out community, butt out local people, big government takes over. Mr. Speaker, that idea went out in the 1930s. It's been recreated by the opposition in a time when we've well moved on from that. And if you contrast that type of big government approach with the much more strategic approach that the government's investment strategy ushers in, where we focus on results and outcomes, not on the quantum of expenditure, where we focus on the risks, not on the silos of how government services are delivered, the contrast becomes absolutely striking. Because what New Zealanders expect is a government, doesn't matter what its political hue is, a government that will deliver the services that they need in a way that they want them needed, not a government that tells them, this is what we think you need, this is what we think you need, and we will deliver for you. It's the other way round. And if the people opposite don't understand that, they should look at the campaign recently fought by Emmanuel Macron in France, because that's exactly what he did. And look at the way he broke the political nexus in that country and stormed to power. Mr. Speaker, there is a very important lesson in that the reaction to the extremism and the nationalism that is occurring in a number of countries is not to reinvent the past, but to respond in innovative and flexible ways. We see signs of that in this budget. Much more has to come, and the government faces some huge challenges over the years. I'll give you one example where there is a conundrum to be resolved. We do need to spend more to upgrade our prisons, because we have more people going to prison and they deserve to be housed in dignity. But at the same time, we've got to adopt a longer-term approach to make sure that the conditions that lead to people being imprisoned in the first place are being reduced. You cannot play the game of saying we're going to be tough on law and order by dealing solely with the consequences. We have to actually deal with the causes. And what this government has done, and is starting to do more clearly through the investment approach that it's focusing upon, is to address the deficiencies in the short term, but also make much more emphasis upon progress in the longer term. And the opposition will not like that, because their whole approach to politics is essentially a grievance approach. Find an itch, promise to resolve it, make sure that you don't actually eliminate it, because you need a political cause for the future, but just resolve it, keep it happy, and hope it keeps bubbling for next time. The last thing you actually want, Mr. Speaker, is to see substantial social progress made, because that actually addresses the fundamental problem that many people face. I don't think that this budget is the absolute answer. I think it's a very positive step in the right direction. It deserves support for what it does, but more importantly for what it foreshadows. The opportunity to use hard-won surpluses effectively to the benefit of New Zealanders, the opportunity to make sure that this economy is resilient to international economic shocks, the opportunity to start to see big deficits in infrastructure and in social spending addressed in a way that will benefit the people of New Zealand. Against that backdrop, Mr. Speaker, it is very hard to see any rational reason for any political party that claims to be credible seeking to oppose the budget. But we will. We will find every sort of manufactured excuse to find it unacceptable. We will find it every way in which we can say that this is not what the people want. The reality is, Mr. Speaker, if you look at the reaction so far that's already coming through, people are welcoming the initiatives that are being foreshadowed in the budget. They want to see them happen. They appreciate that they're getting some dividend for the struggle they've been through in recent years. Mr. Speaker, they are supportive. And what they expect their parliamentarians to do is to give them the opportunity to enjoy those well-earned fruits of recovery, not to be constantly saying we're going to take those away from you, or you don't believe you're not really entitled to them, or we don't really think it's fair that you get them because others get them as well. Mr. Speaker, they are the politics of a bygone era. The really sad reality is to see them played out in the House this afternoon.
I move.
The Honourable Simon Bridges.
I move that this debate be now adjourned.
Members, the question is that the motion be agreed to. Those of that opinion will say aye. To the contrary, no. The ayes have it. The clerk will conduct a party vote.
New Zealand National.
58 votes in favour.
New Zealand Labour.
31 opposed.
Green Party.
14 opposed.
New Zealand First.
12 opposed.
Māori Party.
2 votes in favour.
Act New Zealand.
1 in favour.
United Future.
1 in favour.
Members, the ayes are 62 and the noes are 57. The motion is agreed to. This debate is adjourned and set down for resumption next sitting day. I call the Honourable Simon Bridges.
Speaker, I move that urgency be accorded the introduction, first reading and referral to a select committee of the Care and Support Workers Pay Equity Settlement Bill and the introduction and passing of the Taxation Budget Measures Family Incomes Package Bill. The Government is moving to take urgency on these bills because they are all part of a package of moves that has been signalled today in Budget 2017. The Care and Support Workers Pay Equity Settlement Bill